You're welcome
Thank you.
to LabTalk podcast. This is a third episode of LabTalk, which is titled Understanding the Pre-Analytic Pre-Analytic Errors in the Laboratory. So you'll be discussing about it briefly. So you are welcome. How do you feel about the session?
Good evening. Thank you for having me on this session of LabTalk. I was very excited when you told me that I will be talking on understanding pre-analytic errors in the laboratory. It is something that I'm really passionate about, and I believe that we're going to have a great session.
Wow, amazing. I'm happy to hear that. And once again, you are welcome to let's just dive into this session. So tell us, I would like to hear from you yourself, who is Miss Ndong Leticia. I know you carry a lot of caskets and you have a lot of impact in the society, and I know that very much. But I would like you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
My name is Ndong Leticia Mbu. I am a medical laboratory scientist, and I currently work as a quality assurance mentor with the Strengthening Public Health Laboratory Systems project in the Littoral region. And basically, that's what I do. Also, I am the founder of an organization called the Uncommon Woman, where we work with girls, young girls, and women. So that's me.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you very much for that introduction. You mentioned an important aspect of you about women empowerment through the Uncommon Woman Network. That's an amazing initiative. Most definitely one of our targets for for LabTalk is to bring up more women to discuss about laboratory and laboratory operations, right? It will serve as purpose to empower them and to make them have a voice too in various fields of life. So you are very much welcome. So let's dive into this topic, understanding pre-analytic errors. So throughout the phases of analysis in the laboratory, which there are three of them, the pre-analytic, the analytic, and the post-analytic. Many things happen, and those many things, for sure, since we are dealing with humans, most definitely we may be having some errors at each stage. So we want you to tell us more about some of those errors that happen during this phase. What are they, first of all, and what are the errors? What are the common errors that we find at this particular phase?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. But before I answer, I would like to talk about the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory. That is where everything begins in the laboratory. Also, the pre-analytic phase talks about everything that is done before the sample hits the testing phase. That is patient identification, patient preparation, sample collection, sample transport and storage, and also sample reception for samples that actually come out of the laboratory. These pre-analytic errors, they're very common in the laboratory, and the World Health Organization just released a statement that said that 60 to 70% of all laboratory errors actually happen during the pre-analytic phase. So this is actually something that I'm very passionate about, because 60 to 70% of all errors, it means that it is actually a big problem. It poses a very huge non-conformity for the laboratory. So what are some of these common errors that we have in the laboratory? We have mismatched samples, samples with the wrong patient identification code, hemolyzed samples, sample volume. We have maybe poor patient preparation, because each test in the laboratory requires a particular preparation for that sample to be collected. Take, for instance, fasting blood sugar. If you have to do a fasting blood sugar for a patient who has already eaten, and maybe you did not find out from the patient if the person is fasting or not, the result will be compromised and will lead to wrong diagnosis. So what are the basic causes of these many errors that we've been talking about? There are a lot, and I will just state some few. We have the very first thing is lack of awareness. Most of laboratory technicians are not even aware, or they don't even know that the processes involved in the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory. So without the knowledge, they do what they believe that they know in their heads, which is not actually the standards. Forgetting that in the laboratory, whatever we do, we are actually following norms and standards that have been set. And those norms and standards have not just been set for nothing. They have a role that they play. So maybe you find a staff that doesn't even know that they have to collect maybe all hematology samples in an EDCA tube, or they have to collect all biochemistry samples in a dry tube or in a green tube. They don't know, and they might not even know how to prepare a patient well for sample collection, how to use a syringe properly, for how many minutes a tourniquet is supposed to be on the arm of a patient before blood collection. So you see, and then we also talk about lack of standards, especially in resource limited countries like Cameroon. I believe 80% of the labs in Cameroon are resource limited labs. You see that there are lack of protocols. There are no protocols. I insist so much on protocols as a quality assurance mentor because there is supposed to be standardization in the laboratory. As a laboratory personnel, you are not supposed to do anything without a that you go to maybe the collection room of a laboratory and you find the wall of the room very clean. There are no SOPs, there are no job aids on the wall on how to collect, on sample collection, sample management, sample transport, and things like that. So without these protocols at the reach of workers, at the reach of professionals, it becomes difficult. It poses a challenge because there will be a time that maybe you forget a particular criteria on how to do something. And at the end of the day, you see that you are making an error and that sample is either rejected or it brings in an error from the very beginning of the testing process. Also, the communication gap between clinicians and technicians. Already told the doctor, I am on antibiotics, or doctor, I am not fasting and already eating. But the doctor, these things, are you fasting or are you on? And then they collect the sample and then the culture is sterile. But somebody who is actually staff in relation to maybe the work that enters the workflow, you see that there are certain things that happen, especially in the pre-analytic phase. Shortcuts get used, patient preparation get laxed, a lot of things get compromised because maybe you have to collect 50 patients all by yourself before maybe 10 a.m. in the morning. So maybe you don't really homogenize samples well. You collect samples, you don't really look at how you collect them. You don't really prepare your patients well. Maybe a patient comes for fasting blood sugar. You don't even ask if the patient is fasting or not. Maybe you collect a sample for full blood count and you realize that you don't really homogenize well because you are in a haste. Or for instance, you discover that you collect samples in the back of your mind, you're saying, okay, I'm going to label these samples after. And at the end of the day, you realize that you cannot even remember which samples belong to which patient. And at the end of the day, it
Very
leads to
good.
sample rejection. At the end of the day, maybe you try to use your human knowledge of maybe, well, these samples belong to this person. And then at the end of the day, wrong diagnoses are given to a wrong patient. So these are the few general causes of pre-analytic errors in the laboratory.
Wow. These are what you've just listed are so peculiar with most laboratories that I think I myself, when I visit most laboratories, I think those are the most common errors, right? The lack awareness, maybe the work overload, that's the too much work at the research office, especially when there's an influx of patient. Some phlebotomists get confused with the patient that they receive. Maybe they collect sample and they just place on the table on the rack. And
Mm-hmm.
so doing, they get confused along the line, which is very true. I think that falls under organization and equally training the personnel. I think so, which is very
Yeah.
important. Thank you very much for those points. And lab heads really need to see and work on it. Now, looking at this particular these errors, right?
Yeah.
What's their effect really on patient? Do they directly affect the patient, or is the effect this so mild that it won't have a devastating effect on the patient? Because there are some errors that when you commit them, it has a direct impact on the patient. For
Mm.
instance, when you mislabel a patient, right, that's already for sure. You are going to misdiagnose the patient. So, what's really the influence of these errors on the patient?
Okay,
Are you
thank
able to-
you. Of course, there are very devastating consequences as a result of pre-analytic errors. And I would like to answer this by using real life scenarios. So, for instance, a sample is collected in the laboratory for complete blood count, and the sample gets hemolyzed before it reaches the testing room. They, instead of lab staff in the testing room to reject the sample, they go ahead and they test the sample. And then at the end of the day, you realize that there is an elevated hemoglobin level, a falsely elevated hemoglobin level. Maybe that patient was sent to the lab for full blood count because the doctor suspected anemia. This patient will leave the hospital. The doctor will not go further to maybe prescribe something that will elevate the person's blood levels. Will go ahead to maybe discharge the person and say, okay, go home, you're fine. And at the end of the day, the person's anemia has worsened. Another scenario, a sample of a biochemistry sample is collected in the laboratory for potassium levels, and maybe collected in the evening while the lab is already almost done working, and then the sample is left on the workbench overnight without centrifuging, storing the serum at the recommended temperature in the refrigerator for testing maybe the following day. So the sample is left overnight, and in overnight there's metabolism of cells. Potassium is being leaked from the cells to the serum. At the end of the day, the sample is tested the next day without any problem. Tested and then realized that there is high level of potassium. The doctor received this result and then looks at it and like, oh, this is hyperkalemia. This is an indication of hyperkalemia, which can indicate either maybe cardiac arrhythmia or things like that. And you see that patient starts taking treatment, start taking drugs for something that they don't even have. Secondly, side effects. You know, drugs have a lot of side effects that you don't even deserve. And at the end of the day, it can actually lead to death. Thirdly, somebody that has maybe is diagnosed of diabetes. The person comes to the lab fasting. The person is already a diagnosed patient living with is somebody living with diabetes. The person comes to the lab after fasting maybe for 24 hours. 24 hours. And then the lab doesn't ask, oh, are you fasting? Or did you eat anything for the past 24 hours? Goes ahead and collects the sample and then maybe runs fasting blood sugar or hemoglobin 1AC. And at the end of the day, it's low. The doctor is surprised, like, oh, this is a miracle. Maybe this is a miracle that just happened, which it resulted as a result of poor patient preparation, which is part of the pre-analytic process of the laboratory. So these pre-analytic errors that happen in the laboratory have very devastating effect on the lives of patients. And then for resource-limited countries like ourselves, like Cameroon, where about 60% of the population do not have the luxury of looking for a second opinion or redoing tests that I've already paid for, it is time consuming, finances as well for the patient. You see that you came to the hospital to get treated and you had to spend maybe over the top. For people that don't even have the money to spend, they go back to their houses without really being treated like they would have to do. And for us laboratory personnel, we need to know that our main goal, our main focus, our purpose of being in the laboratory is to give out reliable, timely, and accurate results. So if we are not doing this, we should know that patients' lives are being compromised. The patient is our end product. And if that end product is not right, our result is our results of our patients, our end products. And if the results are not right, then we are not actually doing what we're supposed to do. So we need to have at the back of our minds that all these errors that start from the very beginning affect the patients at the very end.
Thank you very much for that. One important point that you mentioned is time is time consuming, right? Not just for the patient, but equally for the staffs at the laboratory. Because when you get to redo a test, it's actually time consuming. Something that you did for, let's say, 45 minutes, Imagine yourself redoing it again. That was already an hour and a half gone just to do something that you were supposed to do properly. Or maybe you committed an error and you are repeating the procedure all over. That was a very striking point. And coming to these errors and their happenings in the laboratory, most definitely when there's a problem, there should definitely be a solution for it. So what are some strategies that one can employ in the laboratory, either as the director of the lab or as a lab staff at this particular phase to mitigate these errors?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. But the way I will answer this question, I'll first of all like to say that there is no gold standard or a one way that you can use to say that okay, this is the only way that we can use to combat these pre-analytic errors. But these are proven strategies that have proven to work over time in reducing pre-analytic errors. The first thing is standardization and documentation. Laboratories, first of all, me as a quality assurance mentor, I stress so much on documentation. Document and records is part of the quality system essential. The 12 is part of the 12 quality systems essentials. It means that it is very important for the laboratory to have documents, procedures, protocols for everything that they do in the laboratory, including everything that occurs in the pre-analytic phase, from patient preparation. How do you people prepare patients for this and that collection? It is supposed to be written down. How is sample collection supposed? How sample collection is supposed to be done? If it is blood collection, how is this? How is the syringe? The angle of the syringe supposed to be? The particular time in which the tourniquet is supposed to be left on the arm of the patient, which tube is supposed to be used for which test, who is responsible for what in the laboratory, who is what is the temperature for samples to be stored and for how long, what is the standard for transportation of samples or storing of samples. Everything is supposed to be documented and standardized. Everything is supposed to be documented and standardized. Patient handling, patient identification, sample collection involved in the pre-analytic phase. They should staff training and competency assessment. Everyone that is involved in the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory is supposed to be trained periodically. Anytime a gap is realized, training is supposed to be done for staff working in the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory. Staff are supposed to be trained on sample collection, patient preparation, general sample management, that sample collection, transport, storage, and everything that involves the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory. As well, competency assessment is supposed to be done periodically. Assessment is one of the 12 quality systems essentials that it is very important in the laboratory for QMS. Competency assessment is supposed to be done for staff that are involved in the pre-analytic phase periodically. That is actually coming to start. Maybe the laboratory head comes to the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory and does its competency assessment for maybe sample collection. These people have this knowledge. There are procedures everywhere for sample collection. Do they actually know and do what is stated in the procedures and the protocols? Are they following the standards and the norms stated in the protocol stated? Are they actually doing standardized work, or just, even with the procedures and the trainings, they're still doing guesswork? Generally, there's supposed to be staff training and periodic competency assessment to be able to combat pre-analytic errors. Thirdly, we have to talk about sample rejection criteria. This is very important, very, very important in the laboratory. If the sample volume is small, it's low, reject it. Even if the patient doesn't have veins, even if the patient is a neonat, even if the patient doesn't have veins for collection, it is better for a patient not to have results than for a patient to have the wrong result.
Exactly.
Take, for instance, let me go to viral load. Viral load requires, I think, 1,000 microliters of plasma. You see a sample that is collected, maybe two mil sample in an ETGA tube. It is under the pretext that, oh, the patient has difficult veins. That is why the laboratory is not a one-man show. You have colleagues that I think there are people that are very good in the phlebotomy technique of the laboratory. they will help you and collect. Reject all hemolyzed samples. If a sample is hemolyzed, reject it, because hemolyzed samples are a threat to patient results. The accuracy, the timeliness, and the reliability of the result is already compromised. You might be thinking that, let me just help this patient, let me just do it. It's just a hemolyzed sample. You will still pass. You will still have results. That's the truth. You will still have results. Are those results the right results? The laboratory staff working at the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory are supposed to be strict on sample rejection. If a sample arrives in the laboratory not in the required temperature of that particular test result, it is supposed to be rejected. A sample left on the bench overnight, rejected. It doesn't mean whether the consequences, damning all consequences, even if it's on you, the technician, or even if it's on the patient. Our main goal is to give out reliable results to the patient. So we need to be strict on sample rejection. Lastly, I'm going to talk about audit.
Before you even move to the next point, this particular point on sample rejection is one of a key point, because when you get to some laboratories and you see the sample that they collect, you are like, are these people really serious? I remember a post that I made on a tube. You just see a 5 ml tube, you see one drop of blood beneath. Because how can you even save the patient with that type of sample? It's not even going to work. I tell you that, please make it to work. It's very important that we know our criteria. Very important point that you mentioned. Thank you.
Exactly. I think I left out something. Collecting samples in wrong tubes, it it should not be something debatable. I think I've seen somebody trying to transfer a sample from a dry tube to an EDTA tube because she got mixed up that it was full blood count and then collected it in a dry tube. Those are things that are supposed to be rejected. Recollect the sample. It is inconvenient for all of us. We know that's the truth. We need to put standards. We need to be strict on certain standards in the laboratory. There are certain things that we do that are detrimental even to our own profession ourselves, because we look so unprofessional when we do that. It's as if maybe you did not go to school at all. Like I was saying, let's get to audits. I think that audits play a great role with fishing out and helping to combat these pre-analytic errors. Audits, if you periodically audit your laboratory, go to the pre-analytic phase, audit, look at the gaps, check out the errors, then do corrective actions. For the ones that are immediate, you do immediate corrective actions. Then for the ones that maybe long-term, you set out long-term corrective actions for those gaps that you have realized. Ensure that the laboratory actually works on closing the gaps. Auditing the pre-analytic phase of the laboratory is very important. Go there and check. Tell them, the staff working there, this last month we did an audit of this phase. We realized that we rejected over 20 samples due to hemolysis. State out the reasons for the rejection. Maybe it was hemolysis, it was poor patient preparation and things like that. Ensure, as a laboratory manager, ensure that they actually trash out these gaps. They actually close the gaps at the end of the day, so that in the course of the next audit, you see that either the gaps have reduced, either the errors have reduced or they have increased. And then you will know what to do. Either a training is required, or either competency assessment is required to be done.
You have mentioned very great points at that level, strategies to mitigate these errors. A question is coming to me, still on rejection criteria. At the level of the laboratory, we receive several samples. We receive blood, we receive urine, we receive stool. When we come to this particular sample, cerebrospinal fluid, how do you handle that? When it comes to this particular sample, which is so precious, how do we handle that?
First of all, it's not a laboratory that collects CSF. There are doctors that collect CSF. For the times that I've seen CSF collected or received in the laboratory, we have received it with sufficient volume, with maybe in the right sample collection tool and the rest. I like to believe that the people that actually collect those samples, they know what they are doing. At the end of the day, they know what they are doing. It is very rare. I think in a condition where maybe the sample received in the lab is in a bad shape, maybe in a compromised tube, or maybe in a tube in a container that maybe has contaminants, I believe that it should also be rejected. It should also be rejected. A formal report done to the doctor that these samples was rejected because of this, and that. clearly stating the reasons for its rejection so that a recollection can be done.
Very true. That's you have to communicate with the physician who collected the sample, which is very, very important. Most often those samples are always urgent samples in the laboratory because they're very delicate. When you receive them, you have to do as much as you can to analyze the sample and get back the results to the physician as soon as possible. That's very important. Thank you very much for that answer. I'll just slide into the next question, which is what is the role? Who is actually responsible to roll out these errors at this pre-analytic phase? Is it only the director who is in charge when it comes to competency or assessment audit, or is it the role of the medical laboratory scientists at the bench at that particular phase of the laboratory? Who is the sole responsible person for that?
These errors are not the responsibility of one person. The laboratory is a unit. It's interconnected with each other. So the error actually starts from it starts from all of us, from the laboratory manager, the director, the laboratory staff, people working the pre-analytic unit. So everybody is involved. It is but the people that are actually really involved on ground, the staff working on the unit, on the pre-analytic unit, can take like 80% of the blame because they are the ones doing the collection, they're the ones receiving the patients, doing the patient preparation, they are the ones doing the sample management, the sample transport, the sample storage. They are the ones actively being involved in these processes. I believe that even though the lab is supposed to be blamed, 80% of the blame should fall on those people actively involved in the process.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that you mentioned the point on that's competency. When we talk about competency, it means you have been trained before. That just assessing whether the concept of that particular topic that you are trained on is actually understood. Because
Yes.
to me, what I would say is that before even a personnel is sent to a particular bench or a particular duty in the lab, personnel should be sufficiently trained on how to work on that particular bench, which is a point that you've mentioned, and which it's a very important point that one needs to emphasize on, especially at the management level. I'll really thank you for for mentioning that. I want you to give us a keynote message. A keynote message for our audience, a junior fellow. What will you advise them?
We have heard we've heard that 60 to 70% of all laboratory errors actually come from the pre-analytic phase. It means that this is a very huge statistics. It means that the pre-analytic phase, we have to pay more attention to it. If we actually want to reach our goal of putting our results out there that are reliable, timely, and accurate, we really need to look at our pre-analytic phases in our various laboratories. How do you prepare patients? How do you collect samples? Do you run over sample rejection? Do you actually try to help patients by using samples or collecting samples that are not right because you want to help patients? We have to understand that the laboratory is based on standardization. If you're not following the standards and the norms that are stated for laboratory processes, then you are doing nothing. You're doing nothing. We should also ensure that in everything that we're doing, we should keep the empathy of our patients right in front of us. It should not be at the back of our head. It should be in the front of our head, in front of our eyes. Empathy should be our goal in the laboratory. We should make sure that we are following standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I want you to give another message for the management of the hospital. What will be a key message that will give to them when it comes to ruling out these errors at the pre-analytic phase?
To the management of the hospital and the laboratory at large, I want them to understand that the laboratory is a very key unit in the hospital. Without the laboratory, they always say the laboratory is the heart of all diagnosis. Without the laboratory, your doctor is just guessing. It's not just mere bragging talk. It is facts. If your laboratory is not running as it should, you would discover that there will be a lot of incoherencies with results and everything. All of this starts from the very beginning of every testing process, which is the pre-analytic phase. I believe that for staffing, the administration to make sure that the staffing of the laboratory is up to standards. The laboratory equipment, their needs, their reagents, their consumables, that everything that they need for maybe from patient preparation to sample collection to testing to maybe results are given out, are available and in a quantity that they can use, so that the laboratory is not in need. Maybe the laboratory is not having to use maybe shortcuts to do a lot of things, bringing down the quality of the service that they provide to patients. The hospital administration should actually see the importance of the laboratory and do as they're supposed to do.
Thank you very much for clearing the air or the dust around pre-analytic error. Thank you very much for sharing us here on this particular topic of understanding pre-analytic errors. It was an amazing session. You've listed several points, several ways in which we can remedy these errors in the laboratory. I would like to personally and on behalf of the team, thank you very much for honoring our invitation today to talk to us about these errors. You're welcome once more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. It was a great session. I really enjoyed